Welcome back. This is World Insight. I'm Tian Wei. Learning a country's philosophy could be a great gateway of gaining deep understanding of its civilization. That's what David Bartosch told me when I was having tea with him and his friend in a traditional Chinese courtyard that he frequents in Beijing. The German scholar told me he learned from Chinese and German masters the big idea behind unity through differences. I love sitting there with him and his friend in that courtyard with piles of books around us, listening to chirping birds and watching restless cats purring by. I'm so glad to be in this courtyard. It's nice.
The best part about the courtyard is that you have fresh air all the time, and especially in the morning you have birds chirping, and you have cats running.
Right.
There's no wuye here.
And we got great tea here.
Yeah. So you want some tea?
Oh, of course.
Sure. Okay.
I thought you would offer, but you didn't. So you have a lot of wonderful stuff over here, huh?
Yeah. Mainly cultural heritage, intangible heritage.
Maybe in the future we need to do more about the Hutong culture.
Shijia Hutong Museum was my project. Colin Chinner.
Colin.
He had a sound terminal project. He recorded sound of Hutong twice in my courtyard already.
Here, in this one?
Yeah.
So you got to know each other for a long time?
For about maybe 2 years?
Yeah,
2 years.
2 or 3 years.
Yes. We met from time to time also here. I've been invited by Xinyu to cultural gatherings. So sometimes there are friends here in the courtyard. It's very casual, relaxed, and we talk about Chinese culture, civilization, about all the topics.
That's nice. I see you even has your book. How good a friend is that?
Yes. This was my big study, comparative study on Wang Yangming and a German philosopher of the 15th century called Nicholas Cusanus.
So they are almost at the same time.
Almost at the same time. This is this is the most important thinker of the Ming Dynasty, and this is the most important thinker of the Renaissance.
I know that you gather together with many of your friends here for events related to Chinese traditional culture.
Exactly, friends, Chinese friends, but also foreign friends. We have met here on a regular basis, and we spoke about Chinese culture.
There's a revival, right?
Yes.
About
it's
curiosity and interests.
Amazing. It's
about,
amazing.
What is going on in Chinese
right.
traditional culture.
Right. It's amazing. It's kind of a. I think tradition is not just about repeating the old stuff, and what we see now, there's a kind of a merge or combination of a revival of the ancient elements of Chinese culture, but it's also combined or fused with futuristic outlooks, and I think this is the real meaning of tradition. So to carry on the cultural habits in a new form, to transform, and I think
like
this
that, particularly when I know that you had been researching about Wang Yangming, which is one of the most well-known figures in China's philosophy, particularly in Neo-Confucianism.
Right.
Tell me more, and our audience, about who this person is. Why is he so significant?
Okay, Wang Yangming is the most important, I would say, the most important pre-modern Chinese philosopher of the last 500 years, we might say. He's a Ming Dynasty thinker, very famous. He is very important for Chinese civilization, but we might even say for East Asian civilization as a whole, because he is a reformer in the Confucian tradition. He introduced new methods of self-cultivation, which became very, very important since he has introduced them.
Self-cultivation. He's been trying to link the mind and action, but not in a very simple sense, but rather how these two would interact and eventually have one individual being quote-unquote self-cultivated.
Exactly. To me, I have to say first, I'm from Germany, and also Germany has a great philosophical culture, so I was always fascinated by the Chinese philosophical tradition, which spans, we could say, maybe 2,000, 3,000 years. I have seen that there are a lot of touching points, and the idea in Chinese is 知行合一, so the unity of knowing and acting is very fascinating to me in particular because it adds something that is somehow a little bit lacking in the German tradition.
What is 知行合一, first of all?
First, I might have to explain what philosophy at its core, what philosophy is about. And I think philosophy is striving for an insight of that which runs through everything and which runs everything. And this is something that cannot be put into words easily. It's not enough just to understand the core principle of the world. It's also important to realize it in action, in everyday life, to translate this understanding into our daily habits. And this is actually what Wang Yangming's approach is about. So many other philosophers have explained the world a lot or have tried to theorize. And Wang Yangming is putting the finger right to the problem that it's not enough to theorize it. We have to translate, so to speak, this understanding that we gain in philosophy into real life action and to enlighten, so to speak, all our activities, all our relationships. And for Wang Yangming, it starts with the family. It starts with the relationship of parents and children.
One of the things it's very interesting about Wang Yangming, that is, he was in fact lying in a stone coffin for several days. And he was trying to self-cultivate as to what is important and what is he thinking, why is he thinking relevant to what he's likely to do. Tell me more about that.
This happened in Guizhou province, that event, what you were talking about in Chinese tradition, it's called Wu Dao. So we might say the enlightenment, the extreme full understanding of the core principle that philosophers are striving to understand. And what Wang Yangming understood in this context is that the subjective side of our existence, the Xin, the mind, the heart mind, and the overall principle of self-organization of the universe, which in Chinese term is called Li, so the self-organizing principle, they share the same wellspring. They come from the same root. So our subjective experience as an I, as a certain human being, and the overall principle of self-organization, they are connected. They are inseparable, and we can, in our daily problems, in our quest for understanding, we can always turn to that principle, and we can gain answers from there in a sort of intuitive way.
In plain words, actually your action can be directed by the core values that you have at heart.
Exactly. You're born with, so to speak, a directionality which is present in your consciousness. It's always there. It's like Wang Yangming says, it doesn't matter if you look at the sky through a window or if you're in an open field, it's always the same sky.
It's intuitive.
It's intuitive, and you can always turn to that principle, which is also the connection between the so-called interior and the outer. Because actually, for Wang Yangming, the interior and the interior and the outer are connected. They are part of the same Xin, the same mind. So for Wang Yangming, there's nothing outside of this heart mind. It's the heart mind is a surface level where everything appears. You might compare it to a mirror. Usually we see things appearing in the mirror, but we do not recognize the surface itself. So, and the heart mind is the surface. It's an infinite surface.
In other words, he recognized that objects do not exist on their own,
Exactly.
but rather objects exist with the reflection of our mind. Why philosophy is relevant to us today?
I think philosophy is tackling the big topics, the overview issues. I think that's the place of philosophy. And philosophy also provides at bottom or at the peak, so to speak, it provides a very fundamental insight which is shared in all great philosophies. At the same time, philosophy is also the reflection of cultural practices. So if I, as a German, I study Wang Yangming, it's a gateway for me to understand Chinese civilization, right? Because Wang Yangming, he was like a sponge. He absorbed several traditions, not just Confucianism. He absorbed Taoist, Buddhist, Mohist, so many legalist, many traditions. He absorbed that, and through studying Wang Yangming, it can be a starting point.
It's an entry point.
An entry point, and at the same time, it's also an entry point to the future, because also in the 20th century and the 21st century, Wang Yangming's thought has been very influential in China, also in politics. For example, Sun Yat-sen, he was very fond of Wang Yangming, and also many leaders after that always have read Wang Yangming's books. And also President Xi has emphasized the importance of Wang Yangming. So it is also important in terms of understanding modern China, and also to see the relevance of these traditions and how they are transformed into new understandings. And last not least, it's also a bridge, right, in East Asia, because, for example, Japanese culture and civilization has been very much influenced by Wang Yangming, right? So there's also a great opportunity for the communication between civilizations.
This is the reason why we talk about a philosophical issue,
Yes.
is because that we really need it today, as you just said. But to you, what kind of door did it open for you when you were in China?
Oh, it opened many doors, not just one. I started out as studying Wang Yangming from a comparative perspective. So I studied Wang Yangming against the background of German philosophy tradition. There were two doors. So because when you do comparative research, the most important thing is to look at the differences, the analytical differences. Right. So to understand both sides better, you have to distinguish the core aspects. So, and this comparison helped me to get closer to the horizon of Wang Yangming's philosophy and the way how it is really meant in the Chinese tradition, not to project my own backgrounds on this tradition. And on the other hand, it also, looking at Wang Yangming, then also helped me to see other things in my own tradition. So comparing, learning from both sides also helps you to preserve and understand better your own first backgrounds. And now I would say I have at least two backgrounds. And from there, of course, having two perspectives, two basic fundamental ways of seeing the world is much better than having just one opportunity to look at the world. And from there you can...
I love that. Tell me more about these two different fundamental ways of looking at the world.
Especially in the case of German philosophy and Chinese philosophy, it's not completely different. There are many touching points, as I said before. First of all, the great masters in the German tradition and masters in the Chinese tradition, they reach the same core level of understanding. We might call that the understanding of unity through difference.
I love that.
Right? In Chinese tradition, you have He Ar Bu Tong, for example, which is an expression of that. But it's much...
Shu Tu Tong Gui.
Exactly. And in a German tradition, Hegel, for example, he speaks about the unity of unity and difference. The core, or Fichte, he talks about the unity through difference, and the idea goes also back to ancient Greek philosophy, and it's also influenced by Chinese thinking, I guess, or there is a certain kind of resonance since also the Age of Enlightenment, because the founder, so to speak, of the modern philosophy tradition, German philosophy tradition, goes by the name of Christian Wolff. So a very important starting point after the 30 Years' War period in the 18th century, beginning of the 18th century, was Christian Wolff. And this man, he turned to Confucian tradition. He was very much inspired by Chinese thinking, and therefore introduced some new thoughts that he came up with in the context with directing his thought to Chinese tradition. For example, he gave an inaugural lecture, I think in 1722, in the city of Halle, and talking about the Chinese Confucian principles of governance that early. So this is a very important moment for our tradition as well.
Actually, what you just said is very enlightening in a way.
Thank you.
Because now we think about the differences. There are debates, right? Whether it's political debate, human rights debate, philosophical debates. But actually, if we trace it back to our origin, there were a lot of similarities because they were of each other's inspiration.
I have to add something. My answer was also not complete beforehand. There is another important thing. You asked me what are the differences and also the similarities. We also have to see that we start from, as human beings, we start from the same basic fundamental problems. We have to remind ourselves about that. We have the same basic questions. And the different traditions, sometimes they found similar solutions, but sometimes they also found dissimilar solutions. But this is not bad or wrong. And on the contrary, it's a good thing to have the more solutions we have in our backpack, the humankind's backpack, the more possibilities we have to solve our upcoming and future problems. There's so much useful insight from the centuries, the thousands of years before that we can tap into, and there's so much potential. So why should we diminish that potential? And another thing is a big mistake that many people are making today is they mix the analysis of the differences with evaluating the differences. I think it's, in my opinion, in terms of philosophy, it's very hard to evaluate the differences because we don't have an observer, independent point of view. So how can I decide?
We are all influenced by our own cultures.
Exactly. How can I decide if another culture's achievements are better or not as good as the ones that I have been socialized with, or in the context I have been socialized with?
All of these are terrific points. I think that it's really worth a lot of thinking today.
So we have to analyze, we have to understand each other, but we should abstain from judging too early. That's what already Leibniz said. Another philosopher of the European Enlightenment, German thinker, he said with regard to China, especially with regard to China, he emphasized, he said, we should study China first. We should study everything, but we should abstain from evaluating it, because we first have to understand what's going on. And I think this is a very wise approach which a lot of people should think about when they make judgments much too early. They should first, you have to understand what you're talking about, right?
We have been talking a lot, the debates regarding individual rights versus collective rights and responsibilities. This is reflected in the period of the pandemic, particularly about the masks, about the vaccines, and all of this.
Important topic, yeah.
And there seems to be some relevance in studying.
Fundamental relevance, yes.
About what exactly is individuals' intuitiveness vis-a-vis collectively the capabilities. How do you see that after studying Wang Yangming in comparison with some German philosophical traditions? Oh,
that's a very, very good question. I think there's a touching point between, for example, between Wang Yangming and Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel's talk about morality. There's a certain kind of very close relationship in this part of the two philosophies. And both thinkers, they have understood that actually the so-called other is actually a reflection of our own self. So Wang Yangming very much emphasizes that if we separate an I and a you, if we separate that in the mind, we are not in accord with the good knowing which we are born with. We are not in accord with the Tao. We are not in accord. We are not in balance. Our willing is, in Chinese, is 自私自利, so it's selfish. It becomes selfish. It's self-centered, and therefore we diminish ourselves. And the true way of developing our inborn moral capabilities is to understand that actually we are all expressions of the same core principle. At bottom, we are not separate. And Wang Yangming also emphasizes that our Xin forms one, we might translate it as body, one body with heaven, earth, and 10,000 things. So it's not just about it's not even just about humans, it's also about animal ethics, so to speak. We could say it's also about protecting the environment. Wang Yangming speaks about the vulnerability of animals. We have to recognize them for being also the same carriers of cosmic life, plants, plant life, and even natural surroundings. As Leibniz said, we have to ignite one light at the other. Right? The
I love
European tradition and the Chinese tradition, they have to ignite each other. And it's actually what they're doing for hundreds of years.
Yes.
They're already doing it, but we have to become more conscious of this
And
process.
be able to do that ourselves too.
Exactly, in our individual existence. I think that's the starting point. The investigation of our situations with people is the starting point to bring the world back into equilibrium. But for Wang Yangming, it has to start with us. So it cannot be
Just one person.
Yeah, it cannot be introduced from above as a theoretical principle. It also has to come from our own selves, and we have to be enabled to study and to search for it. So that's why, for example, China, the poverty alleviation is so important, that if you're too poor, you don't have time or the opportunity to cultivate yourself. But if that problem is solved individually, the next step is to see the responsibility, not just for ourselves, but for the whole world, that we have to cultivate ourselves individually.
What a beautiful time we spent in the traditional Chinese courtyard, listening to the philosophical exchanges between China and Germany. And that's all we have for today. If you'd like to see more, search World Insight or check out our YouTube channel, follow us on Twitter and Facebook. I'm Tian Wei on behalf of the team. Thanks for watching.